Here's something researchers have only recently put into words, but you've probably felt your whole life. You are psychologically unusual. Not in a flattering, motivational poster way, in a genuinely measurable, clinically documented way. The childhood you had, the specific texture of it, the freedom and the loneliness and the long, unscheduled hours, produced a pattern of traits that developmental psychologists are now studying with something close to urgency. Not because those traits are universally good, but because they're disappearing, and nobody is entirely sure what disappears with them. This is the story of what that childhood actually did to you. The parts that served you, the parts that cost you, and the thing at the center of it that researchers keep circling back to, that they can describe but can't seem to recreate. It starts with something so ordinary you probably never thought of it as formative. You knew how to be bored. Not uncomfortable bored, not reaching for your phone bored, actually, genuinely, profoundly bored. The kind that only exists when there is nothing. No screen, no schedule, no adult with a suggestion, standing between you and the inside of your own head. Tuesday afternoon in July. You're 9 years old. The yard is hot. There's nothing to do, and nobody is coming to fix that for you. So eventually, you fixed it yourself. Neuroscientists studying the default mode network, the system of brain regions that activates specifically when we're not focused on external input, have found that this is where some of our most important mental work happens. Creative thinking, emotional integration, the ability to simulate future scenarios and imagine consequences before living them. It runs on stillness. It needs emptiness to function, and it gets crowded out almost entirely by constant stimulation. In 2014, psychologist Timothy Wilson at the University of Virginia published findings that stopped a lot of people cold. Participants in his study preferred administering mild electric shocks to themselves over sitting quietly alone with their thoughts for 15 minutes. Not as a metaphor, literally. They chose pain over unstructured mental quiet. You would find that incomprehensible, because you spent an entire childhood in exactly that quiet, and you learned, slowly, through dozens of long summers, that it wasn't something to escape. It was where things came from. Ideas, solutions, a sense of who you were when nobody was watching. That capacity is now rare enough that psychologists are trying to figure out how to teach it. You didn't learn it, you just lived it. Over and over, until it became part of the architecture of who you are. But here's where the story gets more complicated, and more honest. Because that same emptiness, those same long hours alone, wasn't only freedom. It was also absence. Researcher Peter Gray at Boston College has spent decades documenting the psychological effects of unsupervised childhood. His work, published in the American Journal of Play, is largely celebrated for showing what free, self-directed play builds in children. Agency, resilience, an internal sense of control over their own lives. And that's real. That's genuinely what it built in you. But read Gray's work carefully and something else surfaces. The same conditions that build independence also build something he's more cautious about. A self-reliance that can calcify. A pattern of handling things alone that starts as capability and can end as isolation. You probably know this not as a psychological concept, but as a feeling. The way asking for help feels faintly like losing. The way someone offering to take something off your plate can produce a reflexive no before you've even thought about it. The way you can be carrying something genuinely heavy and look, from the outside, completely fine. Psychologist Kimberly Schonert-Reichel's research on social-emotional development describes how high autonomy upbringings can suppress what she calls help-seeking behavior, not from damage, but from competence that quietly becomes a wall. When you spent your childhood solving things alone because that was simply what the situation required, asking for help doesn't just feel unnecessary. It starts to feel like a character flaw. And here's the part that takes some sitting with. That pattern didn't come from nowhere. When you were young and needed people, the house was sometimes empty. The adults were sometimes unavailable. And you did what children always do. You adapted to the world you actually had rather than the one you needed. You got very good at not needing. That's not strength exactly. That's a 9-year-old making the best of things. And the 9-year-old's solution became the adult's default setting, which makes what Bandura found both more meaningful and more complicated. Bandura, one of the most influential psychologists of the 20th century, identified what he called mastery experiences as the primary source of self-efficacy, your deep embodied belief in your own competence. Not confidence from praise, not reassurance from others, the specific, durable kind of self-belief that comes only from having actually navigated difficulty and come through it. Every time you found your way home from somewhere unfamiliar, every time you handled a conflict without a referee, every time you made a decision, lived with the consequences, and discovered you were still standing. That was a mastery experience. That was Bandura's mechanism running exactly as designed. You have an unusual amount of that kind of self-belief. It's one of the most genuinely valuable things your childhood gave you, and it came directly from the fact that your childhood required it. But here's the tension Bandura's framework doesn't fully resolve. A self that learned it could cope by always coping alone is a self that can struggle to let others in. The same experiences that built your competence also built your case for not needing anyone. And those two things, being genuinely capable and having difficulty accepting support, are not the same thing, but they can feel identical from the inside. Here's what makes all of this worth understanding right now. Researchers Jean Twenge at San Diego State and Jonathan Haidt at NYU have spent years tracking what has happened to psychological well-being across generations as childhood changed. Haidt's work, documented in The Anxious Generation, and Twenge's longitudinal research on generational mental health trends both arrive at the same finding. As childhood became more supervised, more scheduled, more risk-averse, and more digitally mediated, measurable psychological resilience declined. Anxiety increased. Tolerance for uncertainty decreased. The capacity to sit with an unresolved situation and trust your own judgment eroded. Ellen Sandcedar's research in evolutionary psychology adds another layer. Children who are systematically protected from physical and social risk don't become safer psychologically, they become less equipped. The minor fears you moved through, the tree that was too high, the neighborhood you didn't know, the conflict you had to resolve without backup, those were your threat response system getting calibrated, getting stronger through use. None of these researchers are arguing that the 1970s were a golden age or that everything was better. They're making a more specific and more unsettling claim, that something measurable was present in that particular style of childhood that isn't present now, and that the absence of it is showing up in the data in ways that are hard to ignore. They can describe what it was. They can measure what it produced. What they can't do, what nobody has quite figured out, is recreate it in a world that has changed too much to allow it. So here is what I want to leave you with. And it's not the version of this that feels good. You were shaped by a childhood that required you to be capable, and you became capable. That's real, and it matters, and it's worth honoring. But you were also shaped by a childhood that sometimes required you to be fine when you weren't, and you became very good at that too. So good that sometimes it's hard to tell the difference between genuine resilience and a very old, very practiced performance of it. The researchers studying your generation aren't just interested in what you can do, they're interested in what it cost. And the honest answer is that it cost something. Not everything, not even most things, but something. The freedom was real. The loneliness was real. The competence it built was real. And so was the wall. You get to decide what you do with all of that, but it starts with knowing it's there. If that landed somewhere uncomfortable, good. That's where the real stuff lives. Drop a comment. I'd genuinely like to know what your version of that Tuesday afternoon looked like. And if you want content that takes human behavior seriously, not just the flattering parts, subscribe. There's more where this came from.